Hello, my name's Claire Tyler from Claire Tyler Couture. Today I'd like to talk to you about face masks or face coverings. It looks like we might have to start wearing these in certain situations in the next couple of weeks, so I thought I'd better find out which was the best one for us to work with. And I found a pattern that I really like. It's the one that fits the face really nicely. It's this one here. I've been playing about with the pattern to get it to fit really well. And down below you'll find a copy of the download for the free pattern, and as well as a link to, just in case you haven't got enough fabric in your stash, a link to where you can buy a kit that's got everything in it as well. The fabric you need for these masks needs to be washable at 60 degrees. It's 100% cotton is the most popular one for that, and that's the one I like to use. So if you've got that, gather all your fabrics together and we'll make a start. To make this particular mask, you're going to need some fabric. You'll need 20 centimetres by 55 centimetres of your outside fabric, and then you'll need 20 centimetres by 25 centimetres for the lining, and this could be a matching fabric, or I've just used some cotton lawn here. You'll also need 20 centimetres by 25 centimetres of a lightweight non-woven interfacing, which I've put inside here. I'll show that again in a moment. The elastic I've used is a 6mm elastic, and I've used 35 centimetres, and you'll also need some matching thread. So you'll firstly need to download your pattern and cut it out, and this is the pattern here. So you've got one main piece here, and this is the lining piece. Your main piece, you'll need to cut 2 pieces of fabric for this size. This smaller piece here, you'll need 2 pieces of your main fabric that you're going to use for the lining, and also 2 pieces of interfacing. So I have used, I'll just move this out of the way here, this very light, ultra lightweight interfacing, which is fusible. So once you've cut out, mark your notches. There's a notch on the front here, and there's a couple more notches here. So mark your notches, and then take off your pattern piece. Don't throw your pins everywhere. So these are the 2 pieces we've got for our main outside of the mask. You're going to take your interfacing, the rough side is the glue side, and take it to the iron and fuse that on. So that's your first job, is to fuse on your interfacing to the wrong side of your 2 main pieces. So this is your main piece now with the interfacing fused on, and you're going to put these right sides together and pin them together, and we're going to stitch this seam with a 1/4 inch seam. To do a 1/4 inch seam on your sewing machine, you can use a 1/4 inch foot, which is what I've got here. This is a 1/4 inch foot. It's got the hole in the middle here, and if you line up your fabric to the edge of the guide here, that'll do a nice 1/4 inch seam. So if you do quilting, you'll know about a 1/4 inch foot. If you haven't got one of these, if you move your needle over to 5.5, so you can move your needle over to the right to 5.5, you can use the edge of your foot as a guide again for that. So pin your 2 pieces together and your 2 lining pieces as well, and go ahead and stitch your 2 seams around those curved edges. So I've stitched both the seams on these pieces here, and I trimmed them down to 3mm, so about half of the seam allowance is trimmed away, and then give them a press. And you need to press these over something like a tailor's ham, so you can get a really nice smooth press on these. So once you've done that on both pieces, stitched your seams, trimmed them and pressed them, the next thing we're going to do is make a narrow hem on the straight edges. To do this, we're going to firstly turn up the straight edge by about 1/2 centimetre or 6mm. Here, give it a press, and then you're going to stitch really close to this folded edge. So that's the next thing we're going to do, is press it over and then stitch really close to the pressed edge. So I've stitched really close to the folded edge here. The next thing we're going to do is trim really close to this stitching. And you could use your normal small scissors, but I quite like to use plique scissors for this, because the little duckbill part here goes underneath the fabric and allows you to cut really close to the stitching without catching the underneath fabric. So that's a very useful thing to have. So I trimmed that really close to the stitching. Turn that round again so you can see it. And now we're going to turn it over again and stitch on top of that first row of stitching. So you're going to do the same thing on each side. Trim really close to your stitching, turn over and stitch on top of the first line. So you'll have almost like 2 rows of stitching on the wrong side, but only 1 on the right side. So I've neatened the straight edges on the main piece and the lining piece, so they're all nice and neat now. What we're going to do next is put our 2 pieces right sides together. Make sure that you have the same curves. So you've got your 2 pieces like this with the curves, because it's slightly deeper at this point. And put them right sides together. Match your centre seam, and we're going to stitch them across the top and across the bottom, again with our 1/4 inch seam. So that's the next thing for you to do. So, stitch the seam top and bottom there, so 1/4 inch seam across the top and the bottom. The next thing to do is to fold these side pieces in. Your notches here are where you're going to fold it. So fold that over on your notch. And then we're going to stitch these 4 seams here. So let me just pin those so you can see. So my little notch there, so I can fold that one over. And there. So it all should be nice and smooth. There. So we've got those 4 seams to stitch now. 1, 2, 3, 4. And again with a 1/4 inch seam. Once you've stitched your 4 seams, the next thing to do is to trim off the corners here. So you've got 4 corners to trim off. And then we're going to turn the mask the right way out. So open up one of these little pieces here and then just turn it all the way through. And you'll need to push the corners out. Oh, let me just get this turned all the way through. There we go. Once you've got it all the way through, just push out your corners. You start it off with your fingers and then use a little point turner to push them right out. Don't be tempted to use the end of your scissors or a knitting needle for this, because it'd spoil all your lovely sewing. So that's all pushed out. Next thing to do will be to give it a good press, get all these edges nicely pressed, and then we're going to top stitch just a couple of millimeters away from the edge all the way around. Okay, the top stitching has been done all around the edge, so the next thing we need to do is apply our elastic. So you should have 2 pieces of elastic, which are which you cut it to one piece you cut in half, and the next thing you're going to do is make it into a circle. So stitch it around and make it into a circle like that, and we're going to place the elastic over one end and then turn the fabric over. You turn it over probably about a centimetre, because your elastic's 6mm, and then pin that in place, and you're going to do the same on both sides. So that's the elastic in both sides there. So I've used the flat elastic here. You could use a round elastic if you wanted to, or you could use a cotton tape or a folded up bias binding, so this could then be tied behind your head. Another thing you can do with these masks is you could add a piece of wire at the top here, because we've got the pocket here. I've used a piece of wire and put it between some interfacing. So if you wanted a bit more of a seal around your nose, you could just take some wire. I've actually used a piece of garden wire here, but piece of craft wire, put a piece of interfacing either side of it and fuse it, and then you can slip that inside and you can stitch that around the top here to hold it in place, and then you'll get a bit more of a fit around the nose. I find these masks fit really well though, so you might not even need that. When you have elastic at the sides here, if you're wearing them for any long periods of time, you can find that this might rub behind your ears. So something you could make is one of these little things here, which has got 2 buttons on, and you put this around the back of your head, and then the elastic will go around the buttons. So it's, instead of being around your ears, it's around these buttons. So I thought I'd show you how to make one of these as well now, so that you'd have that to go with your mask. You could do this in matching fabric or in contrast fabric, and I've cut 2 rectangles of fabric here, which are, what have I done, 20 centimetres by 6 centimetres, and I'm going to stitch them together. First of all actually I'm going to fold over one edge here. Oops. I'm going to press over again with my little tool here, press over ½ centimetre on the short edge of both pieces, and then place them right sides together. Once those are pressed, place these right sides together and stitch up the long edge across the top and back down the other side. So that's the first thing to do, is cut your fabric, turn over one of the short edges on both pieces, and then stitch around the other 3 edges. There we go, so I've stitched around the 3 edges here with a 1/4 inch seam, and I'm going to trim off the corners here, and next we've got to turn this the right way out, and the easiest thing I find for doing this is this turning set. You've got a tube which you put inside, put down inside, and then you push the stick down the other end, and that will turn it through for you. There we go. And then you can use the end of the stick to push the corners out as well. There we go. The next thing we're going to do, once you've pushed your corners out, is give this a really good press and then top stitch all around the edge. So turn it through and then top stitch around the edge. Okay, so I've stitched around the edge here, and now we're ready to sew on our buttons, one on each side. Now my fabric was quite a firm cotton, so I haven't interfaced it, but if your fabric's a bit thinner, you could interface your fabric. And you could sew these buttons on by hand, but I thought I'd show you, especially if you're making a lot of these, you might want to sew these on by machine. So that's what I'm going to show you how to do next. To sew your button on by machine, the first thing you need to do is lower the feed dogs. So at the back of your machine, there's a little slider which you push across, and that will lower the feed dogs so that they won't be pulling the fabric through. Set your machine to a zigzag. On my machine it's number 6, and I've put the stitch length down to as low as it will go. I've also used sometimes you can get button sewing feet for your machine, but I always use the satin stitch foot. That's just as easy. So line up your button on top of the fabric underneath the foot, so that when you lower your needle, it's going to go down in the left-hand hole there. Now my machine does a little locking stitch at the beginning, so I'm just doing this manually. I don't put my foot on the pedal until I know that when that needle goes across, it's going to go in the other hole. There we go. So now it's going to zigzag backwards and forwards. I could put my foot on the pedal here if I wanted to and do several stitches, but normally 5 or 6 turns will be enough. And then when I've finished, I'm going to do a locking stitch at the end. So I'm just going to press the locking stitch button and do a little locking stitch. And my machine's got a thread cutter as well. So there we go, that's a button sewn on by machine. So you're going to do one at each side of your little keeper here, and then that's done. So there we go, there's your finished mask and the little keeper here just to protect your ears from the elastic behind them. I hope you find this tutorial useful. If you have, please do like, share, subscribe to my YouTube channel, and you can also follow me on social media at Claire's Threads. All the equipment we used today is listed down below. If you need any supplies, you can see those all just down below the video. Thank you very much for watching, and do keep safe.